Said, I'm a dad. I have 4 kids. I have 2 teenagers. I have a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, and we have an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. And our 17-year-old actually is a Jesuit, right? A senior Jesuit, so he's about to graduate. And we're near the end with him. We think we've done all right, so we're about to find out in a couple years if it works or not. We're not sure yet. There's no guarantee with parenting, as I understand. But we're proud of him. He's a good boy, and we're grateful to see him become a fine young man. So this topic of parenting in this digital age is something that we live it. There's the constant battle of how much time the kids are on the iPads, or how much time they're on the Switch, or how much time they're on the phones, or the different things. And so I understand from a first-hand experience what it's like, with boys. Now, I know it's a different animal with girls, and I recognize we'll talk about some of the research, what we're seeing in terms of differences between boys and girls. And so I don't have first-hand experience, certainly with women in that regard, with girls in that regard. But even just in my counseling practice, as well as what I've seen with the literature, that's where we're going to be diving into. So you're going to get some stories of how we do it in the Sacasa household, as well as just really what the research kind of supports with all of this. So the place I'd like for us to begin, truthfully, is it's just kind of take a second to remember what we're doing as parents. Okay, like why did we sign up for this job? Or maybe we didn't sign up for it, but why are we parents? And what's our goal of being parents? Our goal of being parents, first and foremost, is to raise healthy, functioning young adults. That's it. Our goal is to get our kids to adulthood in a way that's relatively unscathed, with a certain sense of emotional security, to be able to help them and prepare them to be functioning contributors to society. That is what our goal is as parents. And so the reason that's important to remember that is because sometimes we think that our goal is to coddle our kids. That's not our goal. Or sometimes we think our goal is to have to provide for everything that our kid desires. That's not our goal either. Or sometimes we feel like you have to take care of them in every single way. That's not our goal either. Our goal is to maintain a long game with our kids and try to steer them as best as possible towards adulthood, so that when they become adults, they have a foundation upon which that they can explore with, that they have had certain experiences that have tested them, that have shaped them, that have formed them, that they know that they have parents who love them, that will take care of them and support them even if they make mistakes. That is what we all signed up for as parents. And we lose sight of this because we get overwhelmed with all the things that we think we're supposed to be doing. Well, if my kid isn't playing travel baseball by the time he's 11, then man, we're not going to make it to the 8th grade baseball team, and then he's not going to make the JV team, and then he's not going to make the varsity team, and then his life is over. Right? Or we feel that we have failed as parents in that regard. And while certainly it's great to be able to offer and to make sacrifices for them and to give them things that we need and certainly invest in them with regards to interests and certainly financially make those investments for them, that's wonderful, absolutely. But it all serves a larger purpose, And I reiterate that our goal is to try to raise functioning adults who have healthy relationships, who know how to make friends, who know how to navigate friendships, who know the Lord, certainly in places of prayer, that they can recognize that when they're having hard times, they know that they have a place of security that they can fall back on. But that is our goal as parents. And so this is what the Catechism tells us. It says, the role of parents in education is of such importance that it's almost impossible to provide an inadequate substitute. That means nobody else can be your kid's mom. Nobody else can be your kid's dad. I'm sure you have great teachers here at St. Pius, and I'm sure you have great priests, obviously I know, and great educators and all stuff, which is wonderful, but we can't turn over the keys to this car to the education. Certainly our kids, we homeschool our kids up till 8th grade, and then 8th grade we're putting them in the high school system. And why? Well, because we want high school to be that place where they start testing the things that they've learned at home, to begin navigating certain experiences. Our 8th grader, for example, he had some rough times this year as he transitions to Jesuit. And I told him, I said, when he was 13 or 14, or however old he is right now, I said, son, listen, we wouldn't have put you in this environment if we didn't trust you. If we didn't think that you were capable of being able to navigate the challenges that you're experiencing. And so we're grateful that you've told us what you've been experiencing. We're grateful for grateful for telling us the things that you've seen, but we're going to walk through them. We're going to navigate them. We're the only ones who can have those conversations with our kids. And what a privilege it is to be the parent of this eternal soul, of this child, to be able to form this child in the faith, to be able to give them a foundation, hopefully, that is built on love and security, so that they can then take that again and do what they want with their lives. Because at the end of the day, that's what happens, is that they get to choose what they want to do with their lives. And we want them to be able to have the capacity to make good decisions. And so we desire for our kids to grow up and to be able to make the decisions that they need. So here the Catechism continues. The parents have the first responsibility for the education of their children in the faith, prayer, and all the virtues. They have the duty to provide as far as possible for the physical and spiritual needs of their children. So, this is our job. This is our duty. This is what we are called to do, is to educate our children and to help them to navigate the complexities that are certainly there. And when it comes to the digital stuff specifically, I feel, and I'm sure many of us feel, that it's like our backs are up against the wall, and this tide of like digital media and all these technology, all these things are just coming at us, and coming at us rather quickly. And we're trying to figure out I don't even know what I'm supposed to be navigating, what I'm supposed to be doing. What the heck is the difference between Snapchat and TikTok? Can I trust either one of them? I don't even know what Instagram is. That one's old. I thought I just got on Facebook, but that was like 15 years ago now, right? And so like trying to keep up with all this stuff is so overwhelming. And we're going to try the best, certainly, that we can. But we recognize that parents are having a hard time with this, which is why recently, again, in the fall, if you saw those Senate hearings when it came to social media, and the government was holding these companies to task, recognizing that, like, listen, you guys got to do a better job to support parents and to make sure that the restrictions are in place for kids. And so we'll see what the results of those hearings are. We don't know yet, but we're hopeful that certain regulations come down that can make our lives a little bit easier. Simple things like not being able to register for a social media account till you're 13, maybe even 16. If those were laws in place, it would certainly make our lives a lot easier. But anyways, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So, okay, but before we get too much into the negative stuff, let's talk a little bit just about the positives. What are the goods, that have come from parenting in a digital age? Well, certainly we can talk about the pandemic, of course, and the value that we had in terms of Zoom and being able to have communication and still being able to have education during that time was certainly a blessing. But even more so than that, just in terms of FaceTime and conversations that our kids had. Even before the pandemic, like I said, I have boys, and my boys right now, one of the things that they love to do is that they'll be playing the Switch, and then they'll be FaceTiming their cousins in Tallahassee. And so they're chatting with their cousins in Tallahassee while they're playing the game. I love it. I absolutely love it. Because it means that they're doing the exact same thing that they would be doing in Tallahassee. That's the exact same thing they would be doing if they were next to each other in the same room, is playing the darn Nintendo and then still trying to talk with one another. So the fact that it brings this stuff together for boys specifically when it comes to video games, they're doing something together. They're building Minecraft together. They're racing. They're killing people on Fortnite, which is incredibly virtuous. But I'm talking. But they're achieving goals together, and they're having memories and experiences together as family. I love that. I absolutely love that. And with moderation, I absolutely allow that to happen. I have a podcast, and my podcast is an opportunity to be able to meet people, to connect with people, to share a message. Podcasts, and myself as a user of podcasts, I love when I go on a run or when I'm working out, being able to listen to things and being able to feed my mind, and not just being contingent on what's on the radio, but that I can choose the information that I want to listen to. This is part of the benefits of this digital age that we live in. Same thing with YouTube. Being able to just kind of watch YouTube for a few minutes when we want to catch up on sports scores or other fun stuff, Praying for people on Facebook, when Facebook and social media is done appropriately, when people put prayer intentions out or share things that are happening, then we can pray for one another. We can offer novenas, start novena chains, things of this nature. This is the positive. This is what these apps and these devices were intended to be, was to help us to be connected in a way that is healthy, not in a way that is unhealthy. And unfortunately, we're falling too much into unhealthy stuff. But still, we're trying to adhere and recognize that I'm not going to come up here and tell you that the answer to all of this is just to throw all the phones away and let's go back to the dark ages. Like, that ain't happening. That ain't happening. You know, my oldest son a few years ago, him and his friends, they were chatting in the car one day. We were driving home from like a movie or something. And the boy was in the back and he was talking about, you know, his mom was about my age and she was saying how great the 80s was and, you know, how much fun we had in the 80s. And I was like, the 80s was great. The 90s was great too. But we didn't have iPhones in the 90s. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't have anything anywhere close to something as freaking awesome as an iPhone. The iPhone's pretty incredible, okay? I'll be the first to tell you that, like, it's a revolutionary device. We travel all over the country, and my wife and I, we joke about, like, when we first went to our honeymoon in Gatlinburg, North Carolina, back in 2002, we had to actually have an atlas and look at the map. And we had to actually map it out and follow the directions as we're driving the whole way. We weren't listening to music. We were actually paying attention to where we were so we didn't get lost in the middle of nowhere, Georgia. Now, what do? Hey, Siri, give me directions to Gatlinburg, Tennessee. You got it. All right, done. Bam, that's it. Couldn't do that 20 years ago. MapQuest, remember MapQuest, even in the middle, we just did print that out and be like, all right, turn to left there. Is that the street we're supposed to turn on? Turn right there. Remember, like we have certainly improved our capacities to get around because of the phone. So certainly grateful for all of that. This point was driven home for me recently when I showed my oldest son, we were catching up on some movies and we were watching The Dark Knight. Not the Batman movie that just came out, just watch that. That's great. That's a plug for that movie. It's a little violent, but it's really good, by the way. Nice message in terms of vengeance and its limitations. But this talk isn't about movies, so that's all right. But anyways, The Dark Knight, Batman's awesome, man. He has all the cool gadgets and gizmos. You know, he has this tumbler that can drive on the ceilings of cars, you know, whatever, and all this other stuff that he can do. And he's super cool. And then all of a sudden he pulls out his phone, and it's a flip phone. And you're like, Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne didn't have an iPhone. Even Bruce Wayne didn't have anything as cool as an iPhone back in 2004, whenever that movie came out, right? Like, these things are tools, and tools certainly can be helpful to us. And all tools can be beneficial to us if we use them appropriately, and that's the key. We're trying to figure out what is the right way to use these things, and what are the ways that we are seeing that research is supporting that they are detrimental to our health. So in tonight's lecture, I'm going to talk a little bit about pornography, a little bit about social media, and a little bit about cyberbullying. We'll spend probably more time on social media and the ill effects that are there. And then I'll try to wrap this thing up to give enough time for Q&A. So probably about 8 o'clock or so, we'll have a good 30 minutes of Q&A. So if you have questions along the way, you may want to jot those down, and then we'll open up for that conversation towards the end. Okay, so here's a little question, a little fun fact. When a boy is given a smartphone, what is the first type of app that he'll download when he gets a smartphone? A game, you got it. When a girl gets a smartphone, what's the first type of app that she'll download? Social media. That's 100% right. This is what we got. So, and what does this mean? I mean, I guess we can kind of intuit or recognize that women are certainly more socially driven and want to then be able to connect and to connect through these platforms. Guys want to connect also, but they want to connect through the games, through the combat, through the competition, through the action, through the doing. That's why the boys are playing the Switch. Well, my son actually upgraded. He saved up and purchased himself an Xbox. And so now he's just plugged in, you know. He's got the headset on, and he's chatting. And we're only letting him chat with his friends, and it's like a small group. That's all it is. He's allowed to chat with. But he's plugged in, and he's playing the game, and he's shooting the people and doing the stuff, you know. I'm like, anyways. And I come over, I'm total dad mode, and I want to, like, make fun of it, and I grab the headset, and then I start, like, making, anyways, it's bad. So, all right. So this is supported also by the research in terms of the way men and women kind of use, or girls and boys use these devices. Snapchat. 70% of Snapchat users are females. 68% of Instagram users are females. 81% of Pinterest users are female. Facebook is split, about 50-50. And then when it comes to YouTube, YouTube is 62% of YouTube's users are males. Again, thinking about like, what do we use YouTube for? Getting content, getting information, learning specific things. Want to know how to be able to change the alternator on the car? I go to YouTube now, right? I want to know how to be able to, which light bulb, which smart light bulb is the best of all of the above? I go to YouTube now to be able to learn these things. So we see guys kind of being driven to this stuff. So we recognize that there's a difference here in the ways that men and women use these devices, or girls and boys use these devices. And this is what's going to be important when we start talking about social media, and then the effects that it has and the differences between what we're seeing, the differences between girls and boys. So, because I certainly have a lot here to talk about, I just want to kind of begin by offering some points here that's really kind of the highlights of this whole lecture. Here's my little parenting education moment for you. Anybody know what TLDR means up there? Nobody? All right. What was that?
Tough love.
Nope. Too long, didn't read. All right. So this is a shorthand when people are texting and they say, "Hey, did you read the article?" TLDR.
Oh no.
TLDR, right? TLDR. Or when you're on an app, when you're on a website now, sometimes instead of saying highlights, they'll just say TLDR, right? So if you don't want to read the whole thing, you just want to get the highlights of it. Too long, didn't read. Here's your very educational. Listen, if you get nothing else out of this lecture, you know what TLDR is when you see it. You're like, oh, I know what that is. That crazy guy from Kenner, he told me about it. He said it means too long, didn't read. All right. So here we go. So what are the threats? What are the things that we need to be attentive to when it comes to parenting in this digital age? Well, the first thing is that we recognize that we have to be attentive to what they're actually watching. The content. What is the content that they are consuming? What are the videos that they are consuming? What's the media that they are watching? And we want to be attentive to this, certainly for the narratives that are present, like with my kids, as Deacon Gary said earlier, I spend way too much time watching movies and then dissecting them with our kids. And as soon as a movie is over, it's done, and then we have a mandatory processing time. I have a therapist, and so this is how it works in the Sacasa household. We have mandatory 30-minute processing time after every movie. Sometimes it's even longer than that if I don't understand it, or if I have a lot to say about a film. So we certainly want to process movies and help our kids, educate our kids to be smart consumers of media. If they're playing video games that are excessively violent, Fortnite is the limit, I would say. I'm not letting my kids play Grand Theft Auto on their own, right? There's certainly limits when it comes to these things, because we know that there's impact when the media that they're consuming becomes more violent. There's research certainly that supports that the more violent the media, the more likely the kids are to mimic that type of behavior, or to think of it as being something that's acceptable. So we certainly want to be attentive to the content that our kids are watching. Now, I know this is the part that's hard for us as parents, because we can't be on top of every single YouTube video that our kids watch. We can't be on top of every single conversation that they're having on Facebook. I understand that. But at least the content that you are watching with them together as a family, how are you helping them to navigate what they're seeing? And to be able to see if there's certain messages that are coming out within the content itself. So, for example, Disney has a few movies coming out this year. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is coming out, and then Lightyear is the Buzz Lightyear, the Pixar movie, coming out later, and then Thor: Love and Thunder is three of the big movies that are coming out for Disney this year. Well, Disney now has been caught up in this Florida bill, and so as a way for them to show their objection to it, they are making it known that more of their characters very overtly will have LGBT representation. Now again, as parents, you certainly have to make decisions for yourselves in terms of how you talk to your kids about that stuff. But if you're not prepared for taking your kids to a Pixar movie, and next thing you know, you see two women kissing on the screen, which is what will happen in Lightyear. It's stated that they've kept that scene in the movie. If you're not prepared to talk to your kids about that, or you're not ready to have that conversation with your kids, then you're going to be surprised and be on the back, and you're like, what the heck was that? I didn't realize that I was going to take my kids to a Pixar movie, and I was going to see that. So we have to be, as parents, unfortunately, we do have to be more aware and kind of a little bit ahead of the curve, which puts us a little bit of pressure on us. Now again, every parent has to make decisions for themselves in terms of how they navigate those conversations with their kids about sexuality, about relationships, about when you feel the kids are old enough to know certain things or whatever that is. But you just have to be on top of it a little bit more, especially when when agendas certainly are driving some of these things. So we have to be attentive to that. Okay? So content. What are our kids actually watching? Connecting. Seems obvious, but who are they actually chatting with? On both the Switch and on the Xbox, for example, you have certain restrictions that you can have. You can download the Xbox parent app or the Nintendo Switch parent app, which then your kid's profile falls under your parental profile. And as the parent profile, you can set sorts of restrictions of can they purchase things by themselves. I don't have my credit card linked to the Xbox account because I don't want to take any chances. On one night he was like, ooh, that $80 game. Like, I'm just going to go ahead and charge that to my dad's card. That ain't happening, right? But even if it is on there, he can't purchase it because the restriction is that he can't purchase to download games without me being aware of it. Same thing when it comes to conversations with who he's chatting to. He has permission to be able to talk with his friends, with people that I know, or friends of friends. And so I'm allowing it. I'm certainly grateful he can have those conversations for sure. His friends from high school, his friends, like I said, cousins from Tallahassee. And so they'll be playing Fortnite, and there's 2 of them in Tallahassee. We're in New Orleans. They got another cousin that's out in Omaha, or cousin of a cousin that's in Omaha, and somebody else that's somewhere else, but they're all related, and they're all chatting live. And that's fine. I love that. I think that's great to be able to bring that type of relationship together. But I don't want him being able to just talk with so-and-so from, I don't even know, right? All the strangers and all this crazy stuff that's out there. So you want to set those restrictions in terms of who they're actually connecting and chatting with. Similarly, when it comes to social media, if our kids are going to have these devices, then we have to educate them in terms of knowing who they should accept friend requests from and who they shouldn't. So even me as an adult, when I get certain requests and they come in, you see the ones and you're like, I don't think this profile picture is going to work out well for me here. You know what I mean? This woman, she seems a little overly friendly, and she's not wearing enough clothes, for me to be considering this as being a friend. And when I look to see who the mutual connections are, there aren't many, and there's really relatively no pictures on that, and all she wants me to do is to keep clicking on links to other websites. That is going to be a hard pass, right? That's a block right there, that we're not accepting that friend request. For a whole host of reasons. But do we educate our kids to be able to spot things like that? To be able to know the difference between people who are genuinely going to be friends and people that they know versus people that are just going to be spam or things of that nature. Again, certainly we can make certain profiles private that are only accessible by request. Things of that nature are the things that we should be attentive to. Now, if you have a child that aspires to be an Instagram influencer and has the ring light and is cooking with Babish or whatever, a teen edition, and wants to show off, well then sure, okay, then that's a different conversation. If this is social media influencer is growing as a desired career choice for many of our teens. And hey, listen. But again, it's all right with restrictions and understanding how to be able to navigate those things appropriately. My oldest son has a blog and he writes on it, and I've had many conversations with him about what his expectations should be for the blog. And as long as it's just coming from a good place in his own heart, then that's fine. But again, are we as parents having these conversations with our kids to be able to help them to know who they should and shouldn't be connected with? Third piece here is, what does their offline life look like? And this is one of the places where we find the research is pretty clear, that the total number of hours that the kids are on social media specifically, anything over 4 hours a day is where we start seeing a lot of problems. There's a lot of problems, and that's very problematic. We want to keep it down to about an hour a day. That would be the best bet. Well, why? Because if you're spending 4 hours a day on social media, the ill effects are present there. Now, it's actually different between spending 4 hours on Instagram or Snapchat is different than spending 4 hours on Netflix or YouTube. There actually is differences in terms of the effects that we're seeing. But still, when we're spending that much time online, what we're doing is that we are negating our real life interactions. And we as people are social creatures. And so we get drawn to these environments thinking that this is what social life is supposed to be. Being on social media, having these conversations, being involved in everybody's business. That's not reality. That's not reality. But if we're constantly comparing or expecting this to be our reality, we are forgetting the fact that we have real people here with us who love us, who cares, who want to support us. So if these devices and these interactions are used to support our healthy offline life, then that is great. So we want to make sure that our kids, no matter how involved they are online, that they do have healthy friendships that they interact with, that they're still going to those baseball games or going to those dance recitals or doing the cheerleading or all the other things that bring life and health into genuine relationships. So managing and making sure that even if they're spending time here, that what they have here is of significant importance as well. So yes, absolutely, having healthy social life offline is tremendously important for our kids. And this piece as well, like I just said, with hours and time spent online, research really is speaking to about 1 hour a day should be what kids should be doing on social media, but we're seeing things of upwards 4 to 5 hours a day, and that's what we're seeing some problems. So there is a clear relationship between the amount of hours that kids spend on social media and their mental health. It's clear. It's there. Okay. So last thing is sleep. Okay. So sleep. This is where things like having restrictions on where the phone is in the house. And at nighttime, do you allow them to bring the phone into the room? That is a simple fix right there. I would say no. So I for myself, and so I try to practice what I preach, okay, at the house. So if I say phone and iPads all have to be charged out in the living room, then that includes mine, right? Like I'm not going to put a double standard with my kids. So I put my phone out, my phone charges out in the kitchen now with their phone as well and the iPads that are there. Well, that meant that I had to actually go out and get an alarm clock, which was a fun endeavor, going to Best Buy and being like, hey, I need to get an alarm clock. And the nice attendant at Best Buy was like, you mean you want like the Bluetooth one that connects to the phone and like gives you like all the weather updates on the spot? The one that connects to the Wi-Fi and the smart hub and the whole bit that you can control with Siri? I was like, no, I just need the one that beeps. That's like all I need. I just need it to beep and not be super annoying so I can actually wake up in the morning and not be grouchy and yell at my wife first thing in the morning, right? So it took me a few iterations to actually find the one alarm clock that just did that one thing and woke me up in a more peaceful way. So I did this, I get the alarm clock, and it's working, it's great, it's fantastic. Well, you know on Sunday mornings how you get a message on your phone that says, here's your screen usage for the week, and then it beeps up and you look at it and you're like, it wasn't that bad, or you're like, you make justifications when it says it's up or whatever it is, right? So that first week of me having an alarm clock, my phone buzzed on Sunday and it says, your screen time was down, I forget what it was, 27% this week. All I did was get an alarm clock, and my phone told me that my screen time was down 27%. That means that me, as an adult, was using that darn thing a lot more at night than I really expected to. And I think I have a fully functioning brain, more or less. It depends who you ask, right? But our teens who don't have fully engaged prefrontal cortexes to be able to make reasonable decisions, and we're saying, hey, yeah, take that thing into your room with all its nice blue light and all its nice social media and all its awesome games that's going to constantly keep you stimulated and give you dopamine and make you feel excited and awesome all the time until you get off of it and then you feel yucky and awful. Yeah, go ahead and take that thing to your room and then go to sleep and tell me how you feel. Right? So what we're finding again is that one of the ways again that we can pull back and we can set restrictions is all devices have to be charged somewhere else, and they're not allowed in the room past a certain time. Now you might get some pushback for that if you're establishing this for the first time, but that's where you have to kind of step into this also and say, I'm doing the same thing, right? If I'm using the phone, it's going to be out in the living room past 9 o'clock. We can be together, whatever it is, but then whatever the time is, but then it's charged. It's not in the room when I'm going to bed, and that's okay. The other thing is that what this required for me was, well, then what am I going to do before I go to sleep if I can't, check YouTube real quick? So I had to take out magazine subscriptions. Remember those things? I took out running world subscription in Psychology Today. So it's like, oh, well, I'm a little bored. What am I supposed to do? I just actually grab a freaking magazine like 1995 and read this sucker before I go to sleep. And lo and behold, you actually go to sleep. You know why? Because a magazine doesn't have blue lights that flash at you, doesn't notify you about every little thing. You read half a paragraph and you're like, I think I'm more tired than I realized. And you close it and then you go to bed. That's what happens. So sleep is absolutely important. And we're finding that these devices are wrecking us, wrecking our sleep, wrecking our rhythms when it comes to sleep. So these are just some basics, some things as we're kind of getting started. All right. So let's kind of keep going here. Okay. So here we go. Here's some stats. This is from 2016. That we're seeing here. So nearly half of preteens, 9 to 12, have a phone. And of those, 72% say that they sleep with their phone in the bedroom. That's preteens. That's 9 to 12-year-olds. Here's teenagers. Most teenagers, 88% of teens say that they have a phone, and then 82% of those take them into the room. My oldest son, Gabriel, like I said, he's a senior Jesuit. My 8th grader, my 14-year-old is an 8th grader at Jesuit. And we have one phone that the 4 boys share. They don't have individual phones right now. And so it's like a house phone that they use, and they all text their respective friends on the phone. They all use it, and it's a community phone. And the reason for that is because, well, Gabriel didn't even have a phone. We didn't even have this phone until a couple years ago. When my wife needed to upgrade hers, and we realized that he needed one now that he was driving and be able to have that space. But the reason is because, well, one, we just don't, I know what the research says. The research says that you want to delay this as much as possible. But at the same time, I want him to be able to connect and to be able to text with his friends for sure. And so what was the happy medium in that space? Well, we can get one phone that everybody uses. And the nice thing about having one phone that everybody uses is that it actually reminds me a little bit of like when we grew up and we had one house line, and you get the phone, you call the phone, and it's the girl who calls, your brother, and you're like, oh, okay, I'll get it right away. Hold on a second. You put it down, and you're like, ooh, so-and-so's calling you, you know what I mean? And you tease your brother a little bit. Anybody, or your sister, anybody? Come on, right? Anyways, so it's a little bit like that. Like we're kind of reinventing, like this is what's happening. Like you get the text message, you're like, ooh, Gabriel, you got a text message from somebody. We don't know that number. Who's that from? And so it's not trying to invade in their privacy for sure. They shouldn't be reading each other's text threads. But nevertheless, it kind of keeps a little sense of accountability for everybody. And a little healthy teasing in a house full of boys is never a bad thing, right? So, anyways, just being aware here of kind of where we're at with phones and recognizing that Gabriel was the only one who didn't have a phone pretty much for his whole high school career. And certainly he was an outlier. But you know what's funny about this generation, both millennials and even now, is that when you're the outlier, you're kind of cool. Or doing the thing that's kind of retrograde is considered cool now. You know what's cool right now? Riding bicycles with a single gear. Why is that cool? That's like dumb. Well, we don't have hills here, but if you live in a city that had hills and you're riding a bike that only has a single gear, you're like, no man, the reason they invented multiple gears is to help you go up that hill a little bit easier. But no, you want to be cool with your hipster jeans and your cool beard that's out to here with waxed up and everything, so you can look nice and cool, right? No, that's dumb. Like, get the bike that has the multiple gears. So anyways, but Gabriel's kind of the beneficiary of it. So people are like, hey, you don't have a phone? And he's like, no, man. And they're like, that's cool, dude. That's cool. Yeah, that's cool. You don't have a phone, right? And so, like, it's all right. I mean, so what happens is that when he gets home from, like, functions, we always get random 504 phone calls, and we know that that's Gabriel calling from one of his friends, letting us know that he's home and is ready to be picked up from whatever function that he's at. So, anyways, let's keep going. So, all right, so we know that, obviously, pornography is a major issue. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. This is really a whole other lecture that we really just don't have time to get into because I really want to focus more on the social media and the mental health stuff. Okay, let's just kind of see. So here we go. So just some stats just to kind of throw out again. 47% of families in the United States report that pornography is a problem in their home. So average age of first exposure to internet pornography is 11. One of the key differences between first exposure now versus first exposure 30 years ago is that 30 years ago you may have discovered kind of a dirty magazine somewhere, and you're like, okay, there's the magazine, that's it. And maybe it usually was just like a still image of somebody, or maybe it was like that Victoria's Secret magazine or ad that came in or something, which is more of a softcore nature. Now when it comes to first exposure, kids are seeing some very graphic stuff right out of the gates. And it's like it's traumatizing when you see it for the first time. A violent sexual act is a traumatic experience for an 11-year-old brain, and it's kind of confusing because there's a mix of desire. There's a repulsion to it. There's a sense of guilt with it, but of course there's also that excitement and that interest that comes in, of course, when we look at this stuff. And so it's very, very confusing when it comes to kids. So recognizing that the best way to safeguard your kids with regards to pornography, this is really what I want to say, is you want to be proactive. Proactive with talking to your kids about sexuality, about God's plan for sexuality, about what his intention is. We started this conversation with our kids when they were 7 or 8. First talking about kind of why God created them in their bodies. Even when they're little, you talk about safe environment stuff. We all parents here, we understand how we talk to our kids about safe environment. Why is it important that we protect our private parts, the parts that were covered with bathing suits? What's important about those parts? What makes those parts different than our noses or our armpits? So having conversations with kids about dignity, about their worth, and establishing the narrative from the get-go that it's about beauty, it's about God's plan, and that there's something good that's working here. So even when they're 10 or 11 and you start having those changes that are happening, the diocese used to do, I don't know if the diocese does anymore, they used to do the father-son programs. They used to do it right here, right? Or no, this room, it was another room. It was another room that we used to do them, and it was great, man. Those are great resources. I don't know if they're doing them anymore, but since the pandemic, but I took my older two to it. I'm eager to take my third as well. To be able to have these conversations about what are the changes that happen. And so what I found with my 17-year-old and my 14-year-old is that we've been proactive with this, and we've set the stage. And so even as puberty is beginning, I talk about puberty in kind of a positive way. I'm like, listen guys, like the next few years are going to be crazy. I'm going to tell you that right now. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen is that you're about to have a 400% increase in testosterone in your body. And you're going to be like, like freaking the Hulk, right? Like all of a sudden this stuff is like churning through your veins, and you're going to start doing stuff that you never thought you could do before. But all of that is because God wants you to be strong. And so that strength that you have, where our job is over the next few years is to teach you how to use that appropriately. And so nothing about it is wrong. It's awesome. It's all awesome. What that also means is that the way you start looking at girls is going to change. And that's also okay, because God has a plan for that also. And you're like, that's yucky, I'm not going to look at girls differently. I'm like, okay, just give me a year, we're going to figure it out. I'm going to tell you what I'm talking about. You'll understand what I'm talking about when that day comes. So what happens is that inevitably the day comes where you recognize and you start seeing that your kids are looking at the girls a little bit differently, or when you go to the beach and you see the attractive, scantily clad women are out there, and for the first time you look at your boys and they're like, oh, he's checking. Okay, hold on a second. All right, guys, let's. You're old enough now. All right, we gotta talk about this, right? And so, remember what I said earlier, that the goal of parenting is to raise functioning, healthy adults. Well, this is one of those places. And what that means is that here we have certain balancing act. That the goal isn't, my goal with my kids isn't necessarily to prevent them from ever looking at pornography. It might sound crazy for me to say that. My goal is that I don't want my kids to be addicted to pornography. That's my goal as a parent. And so that doesn't mean that I'm like, oh yeah, go look at all the stuff that you want. No, for sure. But what it means is that, like, even if we see situations like this where they're experiencing a little bit of attraction in a way that's new to them, I want to be able to help them to navigate what that is. We have an application on all of our devices called Covenant Eyes, which is a web tracking software. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But what it is that it sends, it tracks everybody's usage on the internet, and it flags things if things need to be flagged. And even if things don't need to be flagged, you get screenshots as the recipient, as a parent, you can get screenshots, blurred screenshots of what they're looking at. So you can at least kind of keep tabs and know what they're looking at. And from time to time, I'll talk to my kids. Even if I don't see anything inappropriate, I'll talk to them and be like, oh, hey, I saw you were on YouTube the other day and you were looking up Pokemon, whatever, so-and-so. Just to let them know that, hey, I'm looking, and I'm checking on these things, and I want to be involved in them. But certainly there are times where things get flagged. It's like, okay, well, hey, we need to talk about that, right? So I'll be like, hey, bud, why don't you come sit next to me? Let's chat for a little bit. Yeah, what's up, Dad? Well, the other day I saw that at 10 o'clock or whatever, you were looking at something, and just tell me, what was kind of going on? And he said, well, I kind of was doing a research project, and I was doing a little search, and then something popped up, and I didn't mean for it, but then I got interested, and then I looked at it, and then I was like, oh man, like that was something, right? It's like, okay, that's great. What about the next search? Well, at that point, he's like, well, yeah, that one I did on my own. Like that one wasn't an accident, right? Like, all right, but that's all right. I understand. Like we're guys. I get it. I understand how this works. But I'm telling you, like going down this train is only going to distort the way that you look at women. And remember what I talked about earlier. Now we've set the stage. What is God's plan for sex? What is God's plan for marriage? What is His purpose for us in terms of our bodies and why He created these things? If I've already set the stage for what it is, then that's the narrative. I've controlled the narrative in my kids' lives as to what sexuality is supposed to be for. I'm not letting the pornographers set that narrative and then me reacting to that. No, I'm setting the narrative and then I'm reacting to what the pornographers are telling them. That's the difference. So we have to be proactive in this space. When we talk to their kids about sexuality, the one thing that I've learned now doing this with almost all my boys at this point is that the discomfort is on us. We're the ones that go into those conversations thinking about, oh my gosh, all the stuff that I did in high school, do I have to disclose that if they find out? Things I even did in college, I want to forget all that stuff, for sure. But, it's like, but no, they don't know any of that. They know none of that. So you're just telling them what they need to know at the age appropriate, and that's okay. And then you have this conversation throughout. Just like you talk about math differently, math's different in second grade than it is in pre-algebra, than it is in calculus. I can't teach them calculus. I don't even know what's going on there. I failed calculus twice in college. That's besides the point. Anyways, you're having this conversation with the kids along the way because you're setting the narrative. And we as parents have that authority to be able to set those narratives in a way that is helpful and constructive, and that we can then talk about the other things as they arise. And so we do have these conversations repeatedly. A 17-year-old who loves to read, I remember one day, he was like 13 or 14, he came in, and I was brushing my teeth late at night, and he says, Dad, what's rape? I said, oh, no, I didn't do that. I was like, you have to play it cool. Whenever they come with a comment like that, you gotta play it cool. You're like, yeah, but just give me 1 second, let me finish brushing my teeth, and I'll come talk to you. And I was like, where did he learn that? How did he learn that? So I was like, all right, Gabriel, why don't we kind of talk a little bit about this? I said, first, give me context. Where did you hear about rape? And he says, of all places. He says, well, I was reading the Bible. I was reading the Old Testament. The Old Testament's rough, okay? If you haven't read the Old Testament, it's rough, right? He was like, I was reading the Old Testament, and they were talking about rape. And I was like, great, okay, thank you, Jesus. Let's talk about this, right? And so, so we had a conversation, and I was like, so remember how we talked about what marriage was and what sex is, supposed to be this gift of self between husbands and wives, and from that, that it's supposed to be mutual and respectful. Well, what if a man forces himself onto a woman in a way that is not respectful and that actually violates all of that privacy and all of that dignity and all of that respect that we spoke about? That'd be pretty bad, wouldn't it? He felt it. He was like, yeah, it is. And I was like, exactly. That's why it's a problem. That's why it's a major issue. So again, having the definitions in place, we can then talk about all the aberrations, so to speak, all the versions of this that don't fit within this logic that we have of what it's supposed to be. So such is the same when it comes to pornography. One of the places where Kristen and I have had disagreement has been with regards to comic books. I still have all my comic books from the 90s, because at some point I think they're going to be collector's editions. You buy all this stuff when you're like a teen. I'm like, this is going to be worth so much money when I'm old, right? And it's not, but that's besides. But anyways, but I still keep on to it because I'm a loser. But anyway, so my kids read these things now, and some of them, I have to admit, for sure, the women aren't dressed the best, and they aren't animated the best, and they're guys who drew most of these things, and so they're exaggerated body parts and the whole bit. And so, we've had conversations, and Kristen's been like, I want to get rid of those things. And I'm like, yes, and there's a place where we need to see how he does. We need to give him a little bit of exposure, not like crazy stuff, but we have to give him a little bit of exposure for him to be able to test within himself what he's feeling. And if we don't give him an opportunity to be able to test what he's feeling interiorly, and if we've sheltered him entirely from all this sexually explicit material, then when he gets to college, we have failed. We have failed because we have not prepared him for what is going to come to him. So we have to be able to have appropriate kind of navigating in terms of what you feel comfortable in. And so certainly there's been times where we've gone through the comic books, and she's like, this one's completely out. I'm like, no, it's not. It's fine. Let me take a look at it. And I'm like, no, okay, you're right. This one's gone. That one's too bad. Okay, we're not looking at that one, right? But we want to be able to have appropriate kind of balancing with it. So even when we're watching movies now, and the scenes come up, and we're like, I was watching Ace Ventura with the boys, right? And even I think it's a good shaking the head back there. Like, I was like, this movie was great. I remember this great when I was a kid, right? How much has that happened to all of you? You're like, show your kids Three Amigos. Three Amigos was awesome, and then you watch it, like, why did I watch this movie? How come I can't let me watch this stuff, right? But so, like, inevitably, the uncomfortable scenes will emerge, and you're like, okay, just play cool. Let me see how everybody's doing in the room. How's everybody feeling? We're okay. All right, let's kind of keep going. And then we'll talk about it afterwards. Like, hey man, how'd you feel about, when you watched that scene? Like, it was okay. Were you okay? Yeah, it was okay. And so this process of navigating lust and attraction and separating what is genuine attraction, what's genuine love, and what's just lustful desire is a process that we all have to undergo in our interior space. None of us are free from that process of discerning interiorly what we are experiencing. And so that same expectation I have on my children, and I want them to be able to cultivate those muscles appropriately before they leave the house. Because Lord knows what's waiting for them in college, So, when it comes to pornography, I reiterate that we want to absolutely have all the restrictions in place, for sure. We want to be able to limit their exposure to it 110%, yes. But even if they do encounter things or you see things that they're seeing, we want to be able to have conversations with them that aren't shaming them, And that's what I've told all my boys all the time. When I see it, and I'm like, okay, well, you know what? She was pretty attractive. I'm not gonna lie. And you know what? You're designed to be attracted to attractive things. So in and of itself, that's okay. That's okay. But it's the feelings that you have when it shifts from just attraction to lust, to abusing her, trying to give some language to this. Where it becomes problematic. So that is the issue when it comes to pornography. Like I said, I have way too many slides. Social media, we're almost at 8. I'm just going to keep talking, all right? So here we go. When we look at social media and particularly the iPhone, the research is showing that there is a year when we can really start seeing the difference, okay? And that year is 2012. And why 2012 are we starting to see a difference between teens before and after in terms of the effects is because 2012 is when America, when we as a country crossed the threshold of over 50% of the nation having a smartphone in their pocket. The iPhone was invented in 2007 when Steve Jobs came out and told us about this device that we had no idea what it was. It's actually funny, if you go back and watch that for fun, go back and watch that initial reveal, and everybody's like super excited because you can like pinch and zoom and different things that we like take for granted. They're like, it goes on the internet, and they're like, wow, that's awesome, right? Anyways, we've come a long way since 2007. The point is that when this thing was invented in 2007 and then Android came soon on the heels in terms of creating smartphone devices, 2012 is when we see this marker of the differences in what we're seeing. So, I'm going to try something here. Let me see if this actually works for me. I tried this before, but it didn't really work. So let me give a shot here to technology. Let's see how cool technology is. If it works. Yeah, all right. See, that's awesome. That did work. That makes me very happy right now. I tried this in a presentation a couple days ago and it didn't work. So what I'm doing is I'm airplaying my iPad to my MacBook right now to show you. See, I told you technology is cool, to show you a website here. And this is something, an article I just read today. This is by Dr. Jean Twenge, who is the leading researcher on these issues on teens and social media and the effects that they're having on our kids. And so the question that was being asked was, how much is social media to blame for teens' declining mental health? particularly after the pandemic. After the pandemic, there was a lot of research that came out to try to understand what was the effect of the pandemic on our kids. And what we found with the pandemic on our kids is that actually in some cases, kids' mental health got better. And the reason kids' mental health got better was for two reasons. What the pandemic did to our children is it actually slowed them down. So our kids got more sleep. So in 2018, teens were asked what percentage of teens got 7 hours of sleep? 55% of teens said they got 7 hours of sleep. During the pandemic in 2020, just 2 years later, 84% of teens said they got 7 hours of sleep. That was one. The other thing that increased during the pandemic was family time, pro-social time, family time. That those two things alone increased our kids' mental health. But anyways, let's just kind of look here briefly in terms of what we're seeing in terms of kind of the years. So this is a study here. It says percentage of U.S. high school students who felt sad or hopeless. That's the blue line on the top. So the blue line, if you look at 1999, we're looking at 27% of kids. Once we get to 2021, we're looking at 44% of our teens are saying that they feel helpless or sad. 44% of teens in America. That's almost half. That's very sad. And right there you can see the spike, 2012, it kind of starts going up, 13, 14, 15, and then bam, 17, you see it starts going up, okay? So that's one issue. Here then, when we talk about separating boys and girls, the red is the girls, the blue is the boys. The question here that's being asked by the researcher is, percentage of U.S. 12 to 17-year-olds with major depression in the last year. So those who are able to hit the criteria for major depression. Again, we're looking at 2005, 13% of girls, about 5% of boys. And then man, we start looking at 2012, and we start seeing a spike happen, particularly with girls. Because what we're finding is that social media is having a more significant impact on our young women than it is on our boys. And you can look at the research which is supporting that. So much so now that in 2020, about 26%, 26% of teenage girls meet the criteria for major depression. Major issue. Major issue. Major issue that we're facing. Major issue that we're facing. Okay? So, mercy. So and the question is why? Well, we ask ourselves again, what is it? What's different about this cohort from previous cohorts? And the single, again, you can't blame it all on the phone for sure, but the single greatest variable that's different between now and then is the devices. It is the devices. And even more so than the devices, it is social media, particularly, which is the culprit for the effects that we're seeing on our young women. So this is certainly significant and stuff that we have to be attention to. Well, so then why? Why? Well, I think for a few reasons. The first is this notion of FOMO, the fear of missing out. We hear stories all the time of, and I talk to college students in my counseling practice and the pressures that we feel of having to make decisions. Back when I was in high school, if I got invited to a function on a Tuesday, I was like, yeah, okay, if it was Wednesday, say it's Wednesday, and my buddies were calling me about, hey, what are we doing on Friday? I don't know, let's figure it out, we'll do something on Friday, right? Now it's like, what are we doing on Friday? Hey, I want to invite you to this party. You're like, no, I don't want to commit, Why don't you want to commit? Well, I just don't want to commit, I don't want to commit. Well, the reason they want to commit is because they want to see if a better offer comes in by Friday afternoon. And so then by Friday afternoon, they have to make a decision, do I do this or do I do this? And then you choose one, and then you go and you hang out and you have a great time, and then you come home and the first thing you do before you go to sleep is you check your phone and you go on social media, and all of a sudden you see that the other group, that other thing that you didn't do, that you could have done, but you chose this one, they're showing their pictures of all the cool things that they're doing. And then you feel like a loser because you didn't do that thing. Because your thing, although it was great, wasn't as great to take pictures that you could be able to share online with. So this is the pressure that we're seeing repeatedly over and over again on a grand scale, is that there's constant comparison, constant need to have to make the right decision, constant fear of missing out on activities. And so this pressure, this place in constant comparison. Of course, we all know as adults that this is a lie, right? I don't think everybody in the room is convinced about that. But hey, We recognize it, but even myself, I'm as an adult, I'm subject to this, you know? So I have a podcast, and I'm on social media, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I put posts out, I spend a lot of time, you know, kind of finding the right image, getting the graphic laid out beautifully, and making sure my color palette is across all my posts, and doing all the work that I'm supposed to do, and creating some savvy, witty posts that I know that's the one that's gonna get a lot, right? So then I post that thing, and it's great, and it gets like 8 likes. I'm like, okay, that's fine, it's okay, it's all right, it's all good, right? And then I'm scrolling, and then the one freaking half-eaten burger picture that my buddy posts gets like 300 likes. I'm like, son of a, throw that thing across the room, right? And I'm an adult, and that's my immediate reaction. So I've had to like set, even myself, I have to be honest, I have to set restrictions in terms of how I use these things, and because I know that I'm susceptible to it, and I couldn't even imagine if I was a teenager, how much more susceptible I would be to these things. So, the answer to FOMO is focus, is attention, is confidence in your decisions, encouraging your kids to make good choices. And if you feel good about, hey man, that you wanted to hang out with so-and-so, then you live and die by that decision. And let that be enough. It's okay. It's okay. You spend a lot of time with that post. Why did you spend time doing that post? Did you do that because you wanted it to go viral? Or did you do that because you genuinely felt like you had something to say that was worthwhile? Well, if it was that, then you offered that to whoever, and even for the 8 people who said yes to that, then maybe it was worth it for them. That's what the point is. It's not just to have the largest audience possible, it's to create things that are genuinely meaningful and have value. So, recognizing then that we have to be attentive to that. Another issue that we're facing when it comes to social media is that it's constantly on. It's constantly on. These devices are constantly on, and social media is constantly there. Notifications, dinging, 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 all the time, all the time, all the time. That's another limit that you can put on your kids. Turn off all the notifications, except for my phone call. That's the only one that needs to come through. You get a text from me or your mom, that's it. Everything else, shut it off, right? Because I don't want you to be distracted all the time. But the problem is that, especially when your kids are experiencing bullying or some type of negativity, if they go on Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat, even with the best of intentions, all the little comments are waiting for them, because as soon as you turn on the darn thing, it's there waiting for you, for good or for ill. And so the challenge is that they can't navigate those things as easily as it used to be. If you were having trouble with the bully, or with the girls that were teasing you, or the kids that were teasing you at school, what would your mom always tell you? Just avoid them. Just avoid them. That's what mom would always say. Mom just said, just avoid them. Just go, just walk around the other round. You know, if you know they're sitting over there in the cafeteria, then you come in on that side and go the other way and just avoid them. Just avoid them. But you know what, Mom? We can't just avoid it on social media. Because when I go on, even when I want to go on to talk with my friends, the negative comments are waiting there also. And so that's the challenge that is with these things, is that they're always on, and it's challenging. So, another reason here is the reason that social media is an issue is because it leads to superficial relationships. The term that Facebook uses for friend is a really poor term. Those aren't your friends. I'm telling you, those people are not your friends. They're followers, they're people that you connected with, but they ain't your friends. Friends are a tight-knit group of people that got your back, that when you have an issue and you need to lean on, you call them. When they have an issue and they need somebody to lean on, they call you. Those are your friends. And you can talk with your friends on Facebook, on Instagram, on Snapchat. That's great. But it's all to support what friendship really is. So my Gabriel certainly chats with his friends, and all they do, you know, if there's just all boys, they just send dumb gifts to each other. That's all they do, all day long. The dumbest gift that they've seen. They're like, hey man, check this out. It's so funny, ha ha ha. And then they text back, and then they talk about it the next day. It's the same thing. It's no different than when we were kids and we would, like, you know, like, eat something gross, and you're like, oh, you take a bite of this, you know, and be like, why? We're just So the problem is that it leads to superficial relationships. And we have a misnomer of a term, so kids don't understand what a real friendship is. The real issue is also that we can't, as creatures, have relationships with thousands of people. We just can't. It's impossible. As pack creatures, maybe about 100, 150 is about our limit of influence, of social influence that we can kind of have connections with. That's about it. Which is why when I said earlier in terms of offline life, that is the point. if those little gifts and things that they're sending, the stupid stuff, is to support them, that the next time they get together, like, hey, when you sent me that thing, that was the funniest thing I've ever seen. Well, now it's supporting friendship, it's supporting kind of relationship, it's supporting their time together. If they're goofing around playing games online, the next time they get you, man, you freaking crushed it that when we were playing Fortnite, man, we were so close to winning that battle right there, but man, that dude just kind of came in, and now they have something to talk about. If it can bleed over in support, again, these things can't be the end-all be-all. They can't be the sole means of communication, the sole means of social interaction. And if they are, then that's when they become very dangerous, and that's when we start seeing the ill effects of them. Next piece here, and I just let go of my slides, just letting everybody know, is the sense of what social media does is it gamifies life. Gamifies life. Great documentary that I would encourage everybody in the room to watch. As soon as we're done here, go home and go on Netflix and watch this documentary called The Social Dilemma. If you haven't watched it, it's excellent. If you have watched it, you know what I'm talking about. The reason I love this one over others, there's a lot of documentaries out there that talk about the ill effects of social media. The reason I like this one particularly is because the people who are profiled in it, the experts that are profiled, are all experts who created all these things. So you have past president of Pinterest, talking about what their intentions were when they started. The guy who created the like button on Facebook, what his intention was for it. Guys who worked for Google and different YouTube and different the software engineers that created all these things, talking about, wow, the cat is out of the bag and we had no idea that this is what we were going to do. No idea. And so for them talking about it, it's really insightful. It's the best one. One of the things that they talk about is that when you're on your feed, universally, how do you refresh your feed? Take your little thumb, right? And you start from the top and you pull it down. Whether it's your email, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Facebook, whatever it is, it all more or less has the same function of taking your thumb and going from the top and swiping down. And the reason that gesture was the one that was created to update our feed is because it mimics a slot machine. And so a slot machine is based on random. That if I pull the slot, I get a random set of characters, and if I get the 3 cherries, then I win. If I get 2 cherries and the whatever it is, the 100, I don't win. And then what do? I do it again. And so this gamifying experience and the randomized element of it actually creates an addictive element to it. Back when B.F. Skinner, who was one of the leading psychologists at the time, was training his pigeons to be able to fly bombs during the Great War, one of the things he did is in terms of being able to teach, how do you teach pigeons? Well, the ones who became addicted to hitting the light, so they would learn if they hit the button, then they would get the food. If they would hit the button and get the food every single time, they learned how to moderate, kind of how they got the food because they knew it was there. If they hit the button and they never got the food, they never hit the button because they knew the button didn't work. If they hit the button and sometimes it would give the food and sometimes it wouldn't give the food, then the pigeons would get anxious and would be the ones who would hit the button more because they didn't know if what they were going to get was food or not food. That same process in pigeons happens in every single one of our brains. And so when we hit the refresh button, bam, on this thing, we don't know what we're going to get. And there's always the moment when we see that little circle, we're like, ooh, I wonder if it's actually going to be something interesting. We all have that little moment of anticipation of what's about to come down the candy machine. This is 100% deliberate. Why? Because it keeps us refreshing. It keeps us engaged. And the randomized element of it keeps us plugged in. It is intentional. All of it is done intentionally to gamify the experience so that we feel like we're getting the slot machine. Maybe this time I'll get the 3 cherries. Maybe this time I'll actually get a post that interests me. Maybe this time YouTube will tell me something that is actually valuable. And sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. And again, as adults, we at least have brains that we can kind of be aware of this and we can learn. Our kids are ill-equipped to handle this stuff. So, anyways. It's 8:15. What can we do? What can we do? One, I reiterate, we are parents, and we have to be a place of influence for our kids. And recognizing that we have authority over our kids' lives, but we also want to accompany our kids as they're making decisions with these things. This stuff it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. So we have to be able to teach our kids how to navigate these things appropriately. So some recommendations that I certainly have would be one, if using what's already available to you on the devices. So downloading the aforementioned Xbox parent app or Nintendo Switch parent app so that you can see who your kids' friends are. You can see what games they're playing. You can see how much time they're spending online, when they're spending on those devices. Similar when it comes to Apple products, you can go into the settings, and there's settings called screen time. On screen time, you can set all sorts of restrictions in terms of when the devices turn off, what applications you want to have limits on. If you want to do all social media apps to just have a certain hour limit, you can do that. You can do all of those things. And you can set it by day as well. You can set content restrictions in terms of what's blacklisted and what's whitelisted, how much they can see, how much they can't. You can do all of that for sure in terms of filtering as well. The third thing that I would recommend, and Android has its own version of that called Android Digital Health as well. I'm not sure how robust it is because one of the main differences between Apple and Android devices is that Apple has complete control of the hardware and the software integration. Android has software, but thousands of Android phones. So the challenge is that Android doesn't have that same tight integration because it's creating one platform that has to be used across a wide variety of hardware devices, where Apple has control over both the hardware and the software. So that's one of the places where there's differences between the two. Third thing I would recommend is that maybe consider getting something like Covenant Eyes or some other type of web tracking thing on the devices, and setting up different profiles for those things.
Can you say it a little slower?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Covenant Eyes. I'll stop. I know. Let's keep going. I'll show it all. You know what? Let's just easier. Let's cut to the chase.
Okay.
I know how to use devices. So, Covenant Eyes. And Covenant Eyes is the one that I recommended earlier in terms of you can set in terms of how much you want to get, whether it's daily or weekly or every other day if you want to get screenshots from the devices. And so we've set it up even in our the house computer that we have a MacBook at the house that the boys can use. We have two at the house that the boys can use. And each of them have their own separate profiles. I don't know why Apple doesn't allow us to do this on our phones, on our iPads. By this point, they should let us have separate user profiles for the iPad specifically. But regardless, for the computers, you can do that. So Gabriel has his profile, Noah has a profile, Isaac has a profile, Mom has a profile on the devices. So they have their own passwords, they get into it. And in each of those separate profiles, I have separate Covenant Eyes. Their Covenant Eyes that's tied to their name is used on each one of them. So I know if Isaac's in on Isaac's thing and something flags, I know it's not Noah who's looking at something, right? And so with both computers that we have at the house, they have the same 4 profiles, and each of them have, those individual kind of Covenant Eyes things that are there. So then when it comes to the phone and the iPad, they're on their own separate Apple ID, Apple account, and both of those have a different Covenant Eyes tracker, the same, so that way I can see what it is now. And you might look at me and say, well, that's nuts, you're doing too much. Maybe so, I don't know. But I think at least have some sense of accountability. It doesn't hurt anybody. And if I can track where it's supposed to go specifically, who's doing what, then that makes me a little bit better to know. So I don't look at it every day. I'm not neurotic. I'm not checking it on every day. I get the emails every day. I don't have time to look at it every day, for sure. But I do on occasion. I'm checking in just to see kind of what's happening. So Covenant Eyes is something that I recommend. Bark is another tracking, but what it does is it tracks social media and text messaging. So it's kind of Covenant Eyes for conversations. So if the kids are texting something that is inappropriate, then you'll get a notification, and something will flag up even for them that maybe a line is being crossed. So that's something to do. Another recommendation here is an actual separate hardware that you can connect to your Wi-Fi. That's called Disney Circle. It's not Circle by Disney, it's sponsored by Disney, but Circle is the name of it. And what Circle is, it's kind of like Covenant Eyes, but it's instead of a software, it's actually a hardware that it controls then the Wi-Fi as a whole. Now, even most Wi-Fi router settings, if you have a Wi-Fi router in your house, You can set restrictions as to when the Wi-Fi is on and when it's off. You can kick people off if you want. You can do all of that on it. But this is maybe a little bit more of an intuitive way of being able to do it. Now, you might say, well, they could just turn off the Wi-Fi and they can use the cellular. That's absolutely true. They can do that. But at least this controls things like the Apple TV or things that are connected that I can't set the other restrictions on. Now, we started with this, but then we switched over to Covenant Eyes, and I found Covenant Eyes to be a little bit better. But even with this, you can set up different profiles, different users, different things, and they even have a Plus edition that can still track devices even if they're off the Wi-Fi. So those are some recommendations for sure. Last piece, like I said earlier, most of us here have younger kids, right? Isn't this what this is? This was for like the elementary, the lower schools, what this was. So I know, but most of us here probably have kids that are even older also, right? And so we're kind of navigating both of them. We're just trying to find the balance with it. And I understand it's tough, especially when there's lots of pressures for kids to be on these devices all the time. But we can implement certain restrictions. And we can hold off. And I'll say even with my son, my oldest son, some of his friends now as seniors have told him, he's like, man, like your parents have done this the right way. Instead of just this being a free-for-all, like I can see the fruit, I can see the method to their madness. I can see that you have better control of your online behavior than even I do. And they've told them that, you know. But maybe 3 years ago they were kind of teasing at him a little bit. And so the recommendations are this: wait till they're at least 13 before they get a smartphone. At least 13 before they get a smartphone. Everybody obviously has different. Recognize everybody's family setups are differently and circumstances are different, so that might be feasible for everybody. I get it. But even if you want your kids to be able to talk, dumb phones are still easy ways to be able to text. There's also other phones called like the light phone, which is a real stripped down smartphone that only really does a couple things. So there are other options without having to give them everything all at once. Maybe even consider, like we do in our house, having like a central phone that everybody kind of uses so they can still kind of communicate. Again, when it comes to social media, 13 is also the recommendation. 16 would be best. Now I know that's like crazy because that's like a junior in high school, and I know at that point most girls specifically would die, would be ostracized by their community if they didn't have social media by the time they're juniors. So again, I reiterate, I don't have girls, so I don't experience that firsthand. But I know from all my friends who do have girls that the pressure is on early. And so if you do give them these devices, if you let them have social media, then you want to be in it also, and you want to be their friend, and you want to kind of check up on their profiles and be able to kind of saddle up and kind of know who they're talking to or what's happening. And even if you're giving it to them, reiterate that there has to be limits in terms of how much time they can be on these things. And so setting those restrictions and being firm about what's too much. Again, the pandemic kind of blew all of that out of the water because we were all online all the time. And so whatever those hours were was different. But certainly now that we're kind of more or less back to normal, setting the restrictions in terms of how they're being able to use these things in an appropriate way. So those are some basic recommendations. It's 8:23, I'm so sorry. I said I was gonna stop 20 minutes ago, but I had a lot to say. So questions? Right there.
What is your opinion on reading their text messages and if you're risking a trust issue at, like, is there a certain age? Because I battle with that, and my husband and I talk about, well, the parents didn't listen to your phone calls. Well, that's true, but I wasn't able to put pictures or images or words that stay in there forever. So have you found that that's something that it's appropriate as a parent, or are you risking a trust issue with your child by reading their text messages?
And everybody's on their own. Me personally, I actually don't read my kids' text messages. Personally, I don't. I find that's
a little much.
I find that's a little much
Yeah.
because if they're having a private conversation with a friend, I want them to know that they can still have those private conversations. But I want to be able to talk to them about navigating kind of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. So if you're sending images or you're seeing pictures that are nudes or things that are inappropriate, then how do you respond to them? How do you know what's the line? How do you know what's too much? When people are joking or making comments, like even socially, how do you conduct yourself in those things? If you're on the group thread and people are starting to tease somebody that isn't part of that group thread, or is it deliberately ostracized, if there was a large group thread and all of a sudden there's a subgroup thread, and that subgroup thread was deliberately, you got caught into, is deliberately there because they're wanting to make fun of somebody who's in the larger group thread, how do you teach your kids to be able to say, get me off of this thread? And so, again, we're trying to teach them virtue, even in those things, but we have to give them space to be able to exercise that, which means that we have to give them space to be able to exercise it. And so, me personally, I don't read my kids' text messages. If they are saying things that are inappropriate on them, then I'm not aware of it, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I have enough restriction on other things that I'm okay with. Now, if I do happen to come across and I see something, then yeah, I will absolutely follow up with it. I will absolutely come down on it, and then have an appropriate follow-up or disciplinary action, on the other side.
Thank you.
Adriana?
Yeah, I was going to ask, with these tracking devices like BART and Common Triage, about the balance between approaching them that you saw something or were notified that they were on something inappropriate without making them feel like you betrayed that trust.
Yeah. Yeah, so like if I've established with my kids that we have an open door policy, I want you to come to talk to me about everything that's happening. And we've established from the get-go that Covenant Eyes is on these devices. So they all know. I mean, we bought the iPad, we bought it, it's on there. And so it's known that it's on there. It's just known, it's just what it is. So if something comes up, again, this is where relationship with your children is important. And if you have a relationship with them where you love them, but you've been firm with them at times as well, then even in these moments it becomes an opportunity to teach them what mercy is. And I can say honestly, the times that I've talked to my kids about the things that I've seen have actually been really beautiful. Truthfully, really beautiful. Tears, that type of stuff, where it's really beautiful, where they recognize that they've crossed the line, but they also recognize that they're loved by their father, even in the midst of this. And those are lessons that I want my kids to know, that even when they do fail, that they are still loved by me. And it's no surprise, because we've been having these conversations since they were 8 or 7, and they know that we talk about these things as they happen. And they also know that we talk about movies and TV shows and other sorts of media. So absolutely, we're going to be talking about what you do on the internet, because it's just all part of our family culture that we talk and we process these things. Because your dad's a therapist. So. Okay. We'll go over here and then we can go over.
So with the shared phone, we have 4 boys too.
Yeah.
How do you I'm sure there's some apps that one kid of one age might be able to use that another kid
Correct.
can't. And then the text messaging, wouldn't the brothers see each other's text messages?
They do.
How do you handle that?
So that's actually where back to I don't need to read it, because I know Gabriel's not going to text something that Jude can look at. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where it sets a little bit of an accountability there, and so it kind of keeps it open in that regard. I could be wrong. Now listen, I could be wrong. I'm not looking at the text. I could be wrong, and I'm sitting here. I'm not going to be ignorant and not think that my boys aren't saying things that they shouldn't be saying. I'm not stupid. I was a 16-year-old boy also. You know what I mean? But my hope is that it keeps just a little bit more transparent. Some of it is that there's a balance, certainly, of privacy in terms of conversation about things, but we also, I think, have fallen too much into this. The danger, so the reason internet pornography became such an issue, if we talk about that specifically, even before smartphone devices, and why we saw a rapid change in how people consume pornography from the old videos and magazines to the internet, was what was called the AAA engine. It was affordable because it was free, it was accessible all the time, whenever you wanted, and it was anonymous. So before, 30 years ago, for you to actually get porn, you would have to go to the store, and you have to look at a person in the eye, be like, I want that one, that there, right? Or you'd have to not even look at them in the eye, and you're like, oh, go to the gas station. You're like, here's some gum, give me some cigarettes, and one of those right behind you. You have to interact with people. So that sense of anonymity, we've kind of adopted and expected that to be the norm when it comes to the internet. And that's also part of the problem when it comes to cancel culture and political issues. If everybody could only use their name for their Twitter handle That would help us tremendously. And if the picture could only be your face as a person, and it was linked to who you are, and that they could actually find you and beat you up for saying something stupid, right? This would help things, I think, a little bit. Maybe not, I'm not sure, people still don't care. But more or less, anyways, that doesn't answer your question. But my point is that, like, you take a risk, you recognize it's a risk. But this is part of it, is that, like, this is a great tool, and we're allowing you to use it because we think that you're responsible enough to use it, and we're going to trust you in this until we've been given evidence that we shouldn't. But we're operating from the place of trust until we've been given evidence that to the contrary. If we've been given evidence to the contrary, then we're going to have discussions about it, and there will be disciplinary actions. So even when we catch things, there are disciplinary actions that happen. So, okay, we've had this mercy talk. This is great, awesome. Now what? What do you think should happen here? Well, I probably shouldn't be on the device for a week or so. That's what you think? That sounds great. Okay, awesome. So then the discipline is tied to the behavior. So then you follow up with that, and then you reestablish trust.
One of the things we've struggled with, less so on devices, but more on, or like smartphones and things, is actually like personal computers, especially where the lines get blurry, where so much of like their schoolwork is on computers, and if the lines kind of get blurry, well, what's schoolwork and what is wasted time in gaming? How do you? I get how to track content, but from just an overall usage, unless we're standing over their shoulders, like how do you keep tabs on what's legitimate usage for school purposes versus gaming and that sort of thing, or is there a way of
Right?
It's true.
Sure.
But I think about even my own usage. You know what I mean? And there are times where I'm really doing real work on my computer, but every once in a while you do need the break, right? And so then you're like, and then next thing you spend 45 minutes on YouTube and you didn't even realize it, right? And you're like, okay, I got to get back to what I was doing before. So I guess I would say there has to be a place where certainly we're cutting them a little bit of slack, recognizing that if they're spending a little bit too much time on Tetris or playing Pokemon or whatever else. They don't play Pokemon on the computer, I know that. That's a handheld game. Pokemon Go, you actually have to go out and do that. So not that old. But anyways, but you talk to them. You say, listen, bud, like, you've been back in the room for 3 hours, okay? And you told me you had 2 assignments that you needed to take care of, and you also needed to study for a test. Have you gotten those things done? Yes? No? You haven't? What have you been doing back there? Well, I've been playing a little bit of whatever games, or I've been on YouTube, or chatting a little bit too much with my friends. Okay, I understand that. What do we need to do to focus? All right, let's focus again. Let's bring it back to the task at hand. Please close those other tabs, turn off the notifications, and get back to focusing on what you need to do. And so again, it's not that we come down hard all the time, but we just kind of redirect them a little bit. Just kind of push them right back to where we want it, reestablishing what we're expecting from them. It's not perfection, ain't nobody perfect, and so yeah, they're going to goof around a lot. That's okay. But if it's becoming a pattern, it's becoming a habit, we need to nip it on the butt a little bit, kind of kick them back into shape, and kind of keep them moving forward. But no, we're not going to be on top of everything. We're not going to be on top. You don't want to be on top of everything. You don't want to be standing over their shoulder, staring at them, and then when they go off on a different website, coming down hard. You can't do that. That doesn't teach them anything. That's, again, we're talking about virtue, cultivation of virtue. You're not giving them the opportunity to do it if we're on top of them. So that means that we have to let them waste time from time to time. And as long as we're kind of helping them know right from wrong, then of course it should be okay. One more question.
Yeah. You talked about earlier that the difference between 1 hour and 4 hours being on social media, and that things go bad after 4 hours. So it's kind of 2 questions. What is that goes bad? And then also you mentioned the difference between if it's 4 hours on
Social media
versus Netflix or
Yes.
anything. Like, what is it because of the constant comparison?
Yep.
That's what social media.
Yep. So both groups, the problem is that, as we've said, managing online life with an offline life. If you get home from school and you only have, 6 hours, between the time that you get home and the time that you need to go to bed, and 4 of those hours are spent doing this, then those are 4 less hours that you could be out playing or engaged with your friends. Time, as we all know, as we get older, is fixed reality. There's only so much of it in the day, and our teenagers don't know that yet, but we do. We recognize there's only, when you choose one thing at 8:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, you are saying that you're saying no to other things. And so that's part of the challenge, is to get them to choose to recognize that when you say yes to 4 hours online, you're saying no to time you could be playing board games with the family, or hanging out with your friends, or going to that cheer practice, or going to that movie, or doing those other things that you could be doing with that time. And so the problem is, and so the distinction between, like you already hinted at, social media versus being online watching games, is that social media then kind of creates it tricks the brain into thinking that you're actually engaging with people, but you're not actually engaging with people. You're engaging with people's profiles, and your fingers are engaging with people's profiles. That's not people. There's a media. Media is a medium. It's a go-between. It's not the same thing as the actual people. It's a medium. It's a go-between. So when you're interacting with the medium, the problem is that with these asynchronous conversations is that everybody takes time to curate their pictures. No one takes a picture of what they look like when they first wake up in the morning. It's always, you have makeup on and it's cute and you have the right filter, and usually 25 pictures are taken before you select the one that's supposed to be the one that you, and then by that one, even that one, you've cropped it to make sure that the lines are all straight, and then you've put on all the little stickers and everything else before it kind of goes up to where it needs to be. So it's not even reality. See, the main difference between social media conversation or texting conversation and regular conversation is that when you're in synchronous, what we're doing, live talk, I can stick my foot in my mouth. I can act like an idiot, and it will happen. I can say things that may not be the most flattering. That's part of reality. But when you're doing it online, and you're curating, you're taking the time and make sure everything looks perfect, you're no longer presenting a version of yourself that's real, because it's not. It's a curated version of yourself. But then when we look at it, so when you're spending too much time in this curated reality, all of a sudden this becomes your reality, your comparison. And then you're like, well, I can't keep up with that. And so then you have to make changes to yourself or whatever it is. And so that's the problem. And girls are more susceptible to that than the boys are. Why? Because the girls are spending more time on those platforms, while the boys are numbing their brains while watching Netflix, for 4 hours. Now again, that's problematic also, but it doesn't have the same comparison issues as social media does. But still, spending 4 hours on Netflix is 4 hours that you could have been doing something else. And so even that still is problematic. Does that make sense?
Thank you, yeah.
Okay. It's 8:37. I want to be honest with my time. I want to thank you guys so much for coming this evening. It was a sincere pleasure being with you. I pray that it helps in some way. My final encouragement is just a reminder: your parents. And God has entrusted to you these beautiful young people. And He's equipped you to be able to do what is right, to bless them as much as possible. And remember to not get bogged down by the details, but to keep the long game. Always maintain the long game. What's the objective? To raise healthy, functioning adults. And so sometimes when an 11-year-old is picking his boogers and he shouldn't be at this age, it's okay. We're trying to maintain a long perspective. That hopefully at some point he's not doing that over at his girlfriend's house when he's 17, right? So you maintain that direction and try to navigate them along the way. But you all are here because you care. You all self-select yourself by being here, which means that you actually want to learn about these things, and many of you are probably already doing these things. And so blessings to you. It's hard work being a parent. Hard work. And someday we will see the fruits of our labors. But probably not today. Okay? So God bless you all. Thank you for being here. And,
your Netflix
recommendation.
documentary.
Social dilemma.
Social dilemma.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mario. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight.
Thank y'all. They just won't have any interest.
Did you